Hi, this is a quick movie taking you through how to set up the Princeton Instruments Pro-EM EMCCD camera inside Metamorph. The first thing to do when you're looking to set up this camera is to make sure there are no current copies of PVcam installed on the system. This is because the Photometrics cameras use Photometrics PVcam and the Princeton Instrument cameras use PI PVcam, so Princeton Instruments PVcam. So the first thing to do is to check the list here and make sure you've got no copies of PVcam installed. The next thing you need to do is make sure that there's no dlls left in the System32 folder. So if you come into C, Windows, System32, which is here, and then if we look down the list for P's, here we go. If there has been any camera or PVcam previously installed on the machine, when you uninstall it, it won't actually delete the PVcam 32 DLL that we've got here. So you need to make sure that this is actually removed from the system before we can begin. So let's delete that. Okay, now we're ready to install the software. So I've got Princeton Instruments PVcam here, which is just an executable we can run. And I should point out I've already installed the so the Pro-EM cameras come with a GigE card to talk to the camera, and I've already installed that in the machine. So let's just install the drivers for that. And there we go. So this is installing our GigE card drivers, and we can check here if they've been installed correctly, as we've got our Pro 1000 grabber device. So this is our GigE card here, and you can see if it's installed correctly, you'll end up with this number and PI written at the end of the driver. If it's not installed correctly, you won't get this. The other way we can look is if we come in here and look at the properties under the driver, it should be Ploara Technologies are the driver provider. So that's installed correctly now. So what I can do is turn on my camera, and then we can check that the camera's been found inside our RS config. So this is going to be PI Acton, so Princeton Instruments Acton, and you come across here and there's RS config. If we click on that there, we should get our RS config dialog box, and it'll tell us if it's found a camera or not. So here we go, we've got a camera under camera 1, and it tells us it's using the GigE interface, which is exactly what we're after. So the next thing we need to do is set up Metamorph. So if I come into my Metamorph administrator, this camera actually talks to Metamorph via the Photometrics driver. So if we come to configure hardware and configure acquisition, then select Photometrics from the list on the left here and click add. As I said, it is a Princeton camera, but we don't use the Princeton Instruments driver. It's actually talking to Metamorph via the Photometrics driver. And let's just check it configured correctly. So we just wait a moment while this dialog box opens. So it's found it, it's in full frame transfer, and we've got it cooling down to -55, which is perfect. So let's OK all of those. So now we've set up Metamorph Administrator, let's have a look at the camera running in the software. So let's open up Metamorph here. And just wait for it to open up. I'm running Metamorph 7.7.1. And if we come to acquire and acquire, there are a few things to note about the camera before we actually start running it. The first thing to say is that EM gain we can change, and that's absolutely fine, and it's linearized 0 to 1000, but you can't change the EM gain with the camera running in live. The second thing to note is that although we have options over here for clearing mode, actually the camera only works in clear pre-sequence no matter what's selected here. So this camera is at the 1024 by 1024 sensor, so it runs at about 8 frames a second, so we need an exposure time of, roughly speaking, 120 milliseconds. I'll leave the EM gain off because I'm actually pointing the camera at the wall at the moment, so there's lots of light in the room. So there we go, there's the lovely chairs over there. But as I said, if I set this to clear pre-expose and I drop my exposure time down to 1 millisecond, we'd expect to get this to have a huge effect on the image we're seeing. But if we look at our histogram here and I click go, you see it stepped for a moment and I was getting a 1 millisecond exposure for the first image, and then after this I'm back to exactly the same image I had before with 120 milliseconds. So I can put in 50 milliseconds here, and it takes me exactly to where I was before, and I can enter in 120 milliseconds, and then it just jumped ever so slightly, but that's because I'm past the read time now, which is exactly where I want to be. So if I just take a 1 millisecond exposure, my preview looks absolutely fine, but when I stop this and click acquire, you can see I've got a really dim image, and that was because that was taken with our 1 millisecond exposure. Whereas if I enter in my 120 milliseconds, and then show live, and then click acquire, the image looks exactly the same as my preview. So as I said, you can ignore the clearing mode, but best thing to do, as I said, is clear pre-sequence, because that's what it's using, and then use an exposure time of roughly speaking 120 milliseconds that takes us past our read, and then you're going to get exactly the same acquired as you saw on the preview. I hope that makes sense. If you get any questions, then just please contact your local dealer. Thanks very much.